build capacity and be more resilient in their food systems. The International Fund for Agriculture Development, of course, focuses on financial support to smallholder farmers around the world. Obviously, a lot of them are living in a cycle of poverty and subsistence living. We need to see that change, and that's why the EFAD exists. So some, as we look at the challenges we face, some will say our food systems are broken. I will contend it is not. And I say that because in 1920, there was about 2 billion people on the face of the earth, and 80% of the people then lived in food insecurity and poverty. Today in 2020, nearly 7.6 billion people on the face of the earth, and less than 10% live in poverty and are food insecure. So those are some of the challenges we face there. We also face a growing challenge where the World Food Program used to go out and develop, or excuse me, support aid in places where it was suffering from a natural disaster of some sort, a tsunami, a earthquake, volcano, whatever it may be. Now that has shifted. Nearly 70% of the aid we provide is going into places where they're in the midst of a civil conflict. Syria, Iran, Yemen, Somalia, across the Sahel and over into Venezuela. So you ask why we aren't making more progress? Well, it's, as I mentioned, it's conflict, it's climate, it's political leaders without the will to make the policy changes to let innovation come in. As I said, terrorism, and we haven't allowed the private sector to be a part of the solution. And I think that's one key component that's missed over the last 20 years at FAO. So for nearly 2 decades, we've seen very little progress in building of that resilience capacity. But like I said, we're very hopeful under the leadership of Director Chu and DDG Bechtel that we're going to see those changes. We've already seen the signs already. So what would we like to see? Well, we'd like to see some of the systems, the innovations, the science that's been around in the developed world for some time, whether it's biotech, CRISPR, gene editing, the use of crop nutrients in a sensible manner, crop care products, biologicals, data science, blockchain, advanced agrolytics. In order to feed that hungry world, we need nutritional, affordable food that is earth friendly while being the solution for climate change. So time is running out and the time for action is now. We're excited about the challenge and we feel confident we're on the pathway to see success.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your passion as well and all that you're doing for both of you. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about something that the UN is doing to try to address some of these challenges. Beth, maybe you could talk about the UN Food Systems Summit that is planned for next year and what that's hoping to do and hoping to achieve in order to transform the global food system.
Yeah, sure. The Food Systems Summit is a very signature event, and one that I hope everyone here learns a little bit more about and pays attention to, because as I mentioned, you know, this 2030 agenda for sustainable development achievement in a number of these 17 areas, and including the Zero Hunger mission, we aren't on track to achieve it. And that's something that's sometimes really hard for many of us to really sort of acknowledge, even with 10 years left in the time frame to try to work towards that. The numbers and the data points just aren't going in our favor. And for many of the reasons that Kip referenced, a number of things that are really outside of many of our control, despite, you know, good resources and support for specific programmatic areas and other kinds of collaboration. So the UN Food Systems Summit is intended to be a catalyst and an activator to really launch bold new actions, solutions, and strategies to ultimately deliver a very aggressive amount of progress on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in this 2030 agenda. As I said, each of which relies in some way on important attention being placed on sustainable and equitable food systems. So importantly, it's being convened by the United Nations Secretary General. So this is very important. While we here in Rome like to think we're the epicenter of the UN's work in food and agriculture, it's a really big deal for this to come out of New York, out of the headquarters, and be a part of General Assembly assembly planning. And so again, this is something that we think is very signature and very important for many of us to engage in. FAO is fully engaged in really all of the elements of the planning. We expect that the event will be held next year. There is an advisory committee, which our Director General serves on. There's a scientific group, which our chief economist serves on. There's a UN task force. There's a secretariat that we are a part of. And so for us overall, we're providing much of the substantive support. As I mentioned, the knowledge, the information, the policy guidance, the analytics that are going into the planning of the topics and the themes and the areas of support that are going to come into the summit. There are actually 5 action tracks or 5 key thematic areas that are currently being planned around the summit's objectives. I may just mention those quickly. One is ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all. The second is shifting to more sustainable consumption patterns. Third is boosting nature positive production. Fourth is advancing equitable livelihoods. And the 5th is building that resilience that we talked about to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. So you can imagine a lot of different nuances and a lot of different approaches can fall into those 5 categories. And this is sometimes, admittedly, a bit of the benefit and also sometimes the challenge of putting a summit like this together in a UN system. On one hand, you want to be really specific and really intentional in the kinds of calls to action or strategic direction that you can give. But we also are a global multilateral organization that needs to be thoughtful and be responsive to the perspectives and the points of view and the positionings of our members. And so you're trying to find a way to sort of thread that needle of bringing a real focus to specific areas of work that can be done in each of these areas, but at the same time making sure that this is a global platform and a global dialogue for all of us to have about the needs that we, I think, are recognizing food and agricultural systems are looking for and requiring today.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And Ambassador Tom, I believe you're the U.S. representative to the UN Food System Summit. So I'd be interested to understand sort of what is your role and what is the U.S. government doing for this particular initiative? Because I believe the U.S. is the largest donor to the UN and to the FAO as well.
Yeah, we are. In fact, I think we're 40% of the budget of the World Food Program, maybe a little bit more than that. With that program now today at a little over $8 billion. Food and Agriculture Organization, I think around 250 million between assessed and voluntary contributions. But where I want to go with this is, let's first understand, like I was talking earlier about the challenges we face at the World Food Program, is we've seen their budget double almost in the last 4.5, 5 years. We can't keep up that trend, and it's consuming too much of the capital. We want to approach this nexus where we see that money going into development, really creating that resiliency and capacity that the FAO is wanting to develop around the world and the many nations they work in. So we see the Food System Summit as a potential to heighten that discussion around that nexus of food security and what we're doing in aid over at the World Food Program. So, but we look at the Food System Summit as a critical element in our global efforts to lay the groundwork for resilient, sustainable agricultural and food systems. And to ensure its success, the summit must focus on critical core areas, including productivity growth, improved nutrition, well-functioning markets, climate solutions, and open trade. So doing so will yield our shared objectives in providing a steady, affordable supply of diverse, nutritious foods, safeguarding the livelihoods, and contributing to sustainable development. So research, science, and adoption of use of innovation and technology should be some of the foundational pillars as we look at the Food System Summit. The summit should also, yes.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, keep going.
Yeah, the summit should really serve as a forum for all stakeholders to exchange knowledge and practical solutions. And all tools for improving food systems must be considered. So we must work to expand options and opportunities instead of limiting them. So the U.S. is taking this role of really engaging in the Food System Summit. I'm serving on the advisory committee, reporting to Special Envoy Agnes Kalibata, of course, reporting on up into the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed and Secretary Guterres. So we're looking forward to the summit. We know it's going to start out being held with a number of pre-events, and the event itself will be held in August or September of 2021. But it's where we really feel we can shape the plan to try to achieve success by 2030 on SDG 2.
Great. And I'd like to follow up on some of your remarks, though, about the role of innovation and, maybe get a little bit of controversy in here because, not every country in the world sees innovation in exactly the same way. And I provided some remarks before this session. And one of the things that I pointed out is that I'm a science optimist. I'm convinced science and technology can solve some of these problems, but I'm a regulatory pessimist. I'm not at all sure that we're going to be allowed to use the amazing tools that are being developed to solve problems. It's not going to help if we have these technologies only in the United States. We need them to reach the farmers who need them most. Can you talk a little bit about both the role of innovation and the regulatory environment and how we get to that future where people are supporting and promoting innovation?
Well, certainly. I mean, if we look at the continent of Africa, you have 54 countries, and only a few have really allowed those innovations to come in and to be used. And speaking of those innovations, I'm talking about simple practices. It could be just the use of fertilizer at times, or crop care products at the right place at the right time, to make sure it takes care of the crop. GMO crops or CRISPR-Cas or the gene edited tools, as I mentioned earlier. Those are some of the solutions we need to see, but we haven't seen the political leaders have the will to change their policy to let those come in. They've been oftentimes strong armed by external forces, other nations saying that, well, if you do that, we won't be buying your food products. So I think it's about us getting the message to them that there is hope for them if they want to grow their economies. They want to see their farmers grow out of that subsistence, that cycle of poverty. They probably need to make some of those changes. And at the same time, they can be the solution for climate change. They can be part of the solution for sinking that trillions of tons of carbon that's in the atmosphere today. So it's all about increasing that productivity in a continent that's going to nearly double its population in the next 30 some years, they say.
Yeah. So Beth, maybe we could follow up on that a little bit. And, what is the role of innovation within the summit? And what are some of the messages that are being sent? Because in a lot of different fora, not necessarily the UN, but the World Economic Forum and others, there's this real focus on regenerative agriculture. And that's fantastic. We need to regenerate soil. We need to bring things back. But when you produce less, put less fertilizer on land, or use fewer insecticides or pesticides or other things, you often produce less food. That's just a consequence of it. And so how do we ensure that, that's not the only solution, but it's part of a menu of solutions? Or is there a role for that?
Yeah, so I know that this is going to be a part of the planning that these different groups are having now around the Food System Summit. But here at FAO, I think, I hope, I'm very optimistic that we are turning a corner even here as an organization around how we have talked about and engaged on topics around agricultural technology and innovation. Let me share a couple of examples of that. So in December of last year, we have a governing body called our council, and Ambassador Tom is a part of that, along with a number of other of our permanent representatives. That group approved the creation of a new position here at FAO, a chief scientist role, and it also approved the creation of a new standalone office inside FAO, a new Office of Innovation, which currently reports to me as we are beginning to shape that. And a big part of what I think both Director General Chu, who, by the way, comes with a plant science background, he's got a scientific background personally, which really changes the nature and the dynamic. Jack, to your point about being a science optimist, I think he'd fall into that camp with you. And that's a very refreshing, I think, change in approach to discussion around science and technology here at FAO. One of the things that I think is just important for, as I'm coming into this role new, what I'm trying to do oftentimes is really sort of force us here at FAO to kind of have a very clear look in the mirror and really sort of assess where we've been and how we've engaged, where we've maybe led and maybe where we haven't but should have. And I would just say, as the outsider kind of now coming in, for the last probably 20 plus years, FAO really sort of slipped into the background and didn't come out in the very engaged discussions that we're having, or the others were having, around genetically modified organisms, around biotechnology, and then enter in these different points of view politically and culturally, not only around GMOs, but now, Jack, you mentioned regenerative agriculture. Agroecology is another important area to the Europeans, who are developing new policies around that. So for us, rather than embracing a diverse point of view around innovation, we really sort of stepped back from the conversation, personal perspective, right? Coming into this role. So now, with this opportunity to build a new standalone office, and I think really reshape the way FAO engages in innovation, my intent, and I think the Director General's intent, is much like Ambassador Tom was saying, is to basically reshape and recast the discussions here at FAO with other partners about what constitutes innovation. And for me, it's all of the different dynamics and tools that Ambassador Tom represented earlier. It is biotechnology and gene editing, right alongside the development of biopesticides, biofertilizers, and other bio-based products. It is AMR, antimicrobial resistance tools. It is data and geospatial and digital applications. It's this entire suite of development that's coming in technology from a diverse group of partners in the private sector, whether that's global innovators or even entrepreneurs and tech startups that are probably all here in the audience today. And so I think for us, a big part of the initial work that needs to be done is recasting the discussion and being open and being willing to talk about this suite of opportunities that exist out there that very intentionally can be adapted to and can be made suitable to address solutions in some of the most crisis-ridden and most difficult countries.
Great. Dan, can we take maybe 1 minute for Ambassador Tom and DDG Bechtel to tell the companies how they can get engaged in this process?
Sure. Yes, we're good for that. And we do have one question from the audience, if I could share that at the end as well.
Okay. Ambassador Tom, do you want to perhaps start?
Sure, I'll be quick on this. So get engaged, hopefully let's share my contact information, or I'm going to talk for Beth here, hers as well, but we have a big initiative trying to see the private sector be a part of the solution. And I don't care how big or how small you are, you all can play a role. I've spent enough time in Africa, and I'm about ready to head back down there again soon, but I can assure you there's a need that maybe some of you in this room or on this call can fill and make an impact around the world. So please just reach out to us, and we'll try to do what we can to find a place, a niche for you to fit in. And if it can't work within the UN organizations, I can tell you that we'll find other ways. But the UN and working with Beth or FAO is going to be our best results right now. So just give us a call.
So I would say I've already heard from a number of your attendees already. I think I've got 4 emails in my inbox that my assistant said, are you going to reply to these? So all even before we've been a part of the conversation here. So to Ambassador Tom's point, keep those messages coming, and we'll see if we can find some creative ways to align on the work that we're doing together. I would also just add, Jack, that we are also working right now to put a new FAO private sector engagement strategy together. And that's another area that I'm leading, that ultimately we hope to be able to present to our council at the end of the year for full endorsement. And our current private sector engagement strategy is about 8 years old, and the world has changed in 8 years. Private sector companies and other actors have fully committed in so many ways to addressing these sustainable development goal-driven missions. And we need to find more ways to align with them. And the other thing that I would say around our engagement with private sector, we need to become more modernized, more flexible, more dynamic in the ways that we work with private sector partners. In the past, again, not to be critical of my own organization, but in the past it was finding a way to get a company to come to headquarters in Rome, having a ceremonial MOU, memorandum of understanding signing, with not always a lot of detail and teeth and action behind that. And so now maybe the best way to engage with the private sector isn't about either writing a check or signing an MOU. It might be more about technical support. It might be about sharing data. It might be about how do we connect an innovation or a technology play into a country office that we have in some particular area. And so more of that connecting and that facilitating to make sure that we put the right innovation, the right expertise, the right knowledge and research into the places that we know and have a footprint and where that need is most great is something that's, I think, another really important focus for us.
Before Dan asked the last question, I want to say that there is a document that gives an overview of the UN Food Systems Summit. If you go to the panelist tab or this panel tab on the portal, and then you click on the files, you will find that document. It's so fresh off the presses that it does not yet exist on the UN website. It is only available through us. Dan.
All right, Jack, thanks so much. And I think Beth did touch on the question that was asked, so I think I will leave it at if you look to the chat box, you will see Ambassador Kip, Tom's email if you need to have any follow-up dialogue with him. And as LARDA usually does during the Ag Innovation Showcase, they have contact information for all of our guests. So there will be an opportunity for you to reach out, and I want to thank you and your guests for helping us get through this very quick session, and appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks to Ambassador EDG. Back to
Thanks for having us.
So I think you're getting a feel. You're getting a feel now for how quickly we move from one to the next. And Rohit has already gone to our next segment, climate resilient agriculture. That is going to be starting promptly on the half hour. We had scheduled a little break here, but we do encourage you during breaks to stay here and see some important videos. You can also network through the chat portals. You can set up individual meetings, go to the discussion rooms. You can look over our wonderful sponsor list, visit our virtual exhibits. Just be mindful that we do try to start each session on time, and you won't want to miss any of the programming as it moves rather quickly during the 12th Annual Ag Innovation Showcase. We are going to start again on the half hour with climate resilient agriculture, the critical role of equipment and adaptive soil health systems. So at this time, we'll move to that segment.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.